is a podcast about all things holistic health and self-discovery with me, Ask Elizabeth, counsellor, health advocate and fundraiser. Join me as we get to know these guests and learn about how they implement health, well-being and self-care practices into their lives. Welcome to Unearthing Wellbeing with Ask Elizabeth, where our greatest wealth is health. Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Unearthing Wellbeing. This next guest is author and workshop leader Phillip Shepherd. He is the creator of the Embodied Present Process, aka TEPP, and on his personal journey to embodiment back in his teens, he cycled from England to Japan with only the complete works of Shakespeare as his companion. Phillip really emphasized the need for us all to start becoming more in tune with our bodies. You'll find out more about what I mean in this talk, which I will now allow you to sit back and listen to. So here is Phillip Shepherd. Hi Phillip, thank you so much for coming on to Unearthing Wellbeing. It's much appreciated. How are you today?
I'm pretty fine. How are you, Elizabeth?
Good, thank you. So for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, where to begin? The sort of evident stuff is I've written a couple of books and I teach workshops and facilitators trainings. I've developed a sort of approach to embodiment that I call the Embodied Present Process, or TEPP for short. And it's really what my life has been about. In our culture, we are ripped out of our bodies and into our heads. And we take that to be normal. We accept that that's what being human feels like, is to be sitting up there organizing and evaluating and designing, and there is this teeming intelligence in the body, and it's not an easy thing for us to reunite with it, because part of it is there's this model we have that says, well, the brain, of course, is where you think, and it's the center of the self. And then there's this vehicle below the neck that is there to carry the brain around. And that's not a new metaphor. That goes back to 350 BC. Plato writes about it in his dialogue Timaeus. It's pretty enjoyable because there's this very wise man, Timaeus, who was asked this question: how did the gods fashion us? And Timaeus answers, well, first they created this divine sphere based on the orbs of the heavens. And then they realized that this divine sphere wasn't going to be able to get around very well, so they created a vehicle for it, the arms and legs and a trunk. And so there we are, 350 BC, and already the body is being described as a vehicle. And the reality is that the body processes 1 billion times more information than we can be conscious of. 1 billion to 1. Yeah, and you cannot cerebrally know that billion parts, but you can feel it. And you can sort of drop into the body and attune to the present. And there is so much information there. And I think as a culture, it may sound paradoxical, but I think we are starved for information, because the only kind of information we recognize is verbal information. And so we can process that. And meanwhile, there is this forest of life around us, with tendrils that tremble to the present, and every trembling passes through the body, and you're quickened into life by that. But there's this, that forest, that ocean of information remains inaccessible to us when we dissociate from the body and live in our heads. It's a long answer to tell us about yourself.
It's such a beautiful way of describing embodiment and the paradox between our minds and our bodies, though.
I mean, not in any way to deny your language, but the way I think about it is the paradox between our brains and our minds. Because I feel the whole of my being is mindful and aware and capable of discernment in a way that this conscious brain falls short of.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much that there's possible and we can tap into, but we don't.
No, I mean, there is so much happening in the unconscious realm that governs our behavior and our choices and puts us on automatic. And there's value in being able to go on automatic. I mean, if I had to write longhand and shape every letter consciously, it would be laborious. The hand knows the pattern and it does it. And the body takes care of that because it's learned. Or if I'm hitting a tennis ball, I don't have to calculate. The body knows and feels it. But there is choice that we acquire as we more deeply come in touch with the body's ancient wisdom. We go from living on automatic. In our culture, you can go through the whole day without a moment of mindful presence.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of us aren't mindful, and like you said, we're in auto drive, basically, and we're not actually feeling into what's going on and being present with ourselves.
And I think, for me, one of the impediments that we face in striving to be more mindful is that we've defined mindfulness as a modality in which you sit in your head and you notice your breath, and you notice the table, and you notice the tree outside your window. But sitting in the head and noticing is brainfulness. It's not mindfulness. Mindfulness is what happens when that center of awareness actually relocates. It drops out of the head and descends through the body, so you are aware of the world from the pelvic bowl, from the pelvic floor. You feel it from there, you hear it from there. And then you're not mindful in a way that holds you in isolation from the world. When you're sitting in your head noticing, it's like you're in the car looking through the windshield. This mindfulness that the body naturally dilates into is not a local phenomenon. It is a field. You're attuning to the field of the present.
Amazing. Yeah, I think so too. And like you tell us a lot about embodiment. For those who don't actually grasp what that is, could you tell us a little bit more about that and your definition? And how we become more embodied?
Well, yeah. Yeah, there's my life in a nutshell. It's been, yeah, I mean, it's been the question, and it's such a fruitful quest, that journey back to the body. I don't know that there's a greater adventure that awaits us in the whole of our lives. So what is embodiment? I mean, embodiment to me is what happens when the whole of your intelligence comes into coherence. And that, the intelligence of the body, the subtle currents of the present that course through the unconscious, that's all part of it. So if the whole of my intelligence is going to come into coherence, the whole of my body has to come into relationship with itself. And we compartmentalize the body. We've got our shoulder that's holding on to one thing, and our belly that daren't breathe because of what that might turn up, and our legs, we don't even notice our legs, they've gone to sleep. So the intelligence of the body has been baffled and corridored and compartmentalized. And so the first stage of embodiment, in a way, is to access those shadows, those orphaned parts of ourselves, and bring them into relationship with each other. And then the other impediment to embodiment that we face is our whole cultural notion of what the body is. I mean, it's this biological machinery that's run by the brain and the head. That's our received metaphor for the body. And to me, the body is a resonator. It's basically a resonator. And so it's like I've got a singing bowl. It's like the singing bowl, right? And the present is going like that. Every moment of your life. And your body is resonating to it. But what happens in our culture is we stuff the body full of tensions, and we compartmentalize and we fill it. Our bodies are filled rather than spacious. So the present is still going like this, but we don't feel it. We don't notice it. We're too engrossed in our own divisions and managerial impulses. So it's going like this, and that's a lack of embodiment.
Yeah.
So embodiment to me is when we recover the spaciousness of the body and open it to the world and let it come once more into that place where it just sings to the world around it.
Such poetry. I love it.
It's how I feel it,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of your works and talks, I guess, compare life as we know it and life as we don't know it in reality to poetry and to works from people like Shakespeare. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, my background is I've been an actor all my life. And so Shakespeare thrums through my being. When I was 18, I went to London, England. I'm from Canada. I bought a bicycle. I headed off for Japan on my bicycle, and the one book I took with me the whole time was the complete works of Shakespeare.
Wow.
Yeah. And there's there's that question, what makes Shakespeare great? And there are so many different ways of answering that. What makes his language so potent? But to me, the potency of his language is that it is thoroughly embodied. It's like the body lives through every beat, every phrase, every stanza. It's extraordinary. we feel the language in our bodies. We don't, we're not putting together ideas that he's presenting. We are feeling the world that he's created in the play through our bodies, because the language itself speaks to our bodies. Or at least that's my take on it.
I'm just thinking back to when I was in high school and I was learning about Shakespeare in literature, and we did obviously like Romeo and Juliet in our first like English class, but then we went into Twelfth Night and I think it was Hamlet, and it's just amazing that like the prose and just how he writes his poet. I guess it's not even poems; it's books, literature.
It's humanity.
Yeah.
There's humanity on the page.
It's so beautiful, and I think it evokes a lot of feelings, and it helps you tap into those parts of us that we don't normally tap into.
Like the body.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
What I was going to ask and what that led me to was your books. Can you tell us a little bit about them? And like there's obviously, you've got New Self, New World and Radical Wholeness, whichever one you like to talk about first. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, the first book I wrote was New Self, New World. And it's not even a book. I didn't decide, I'm going to write a book. What it was at 5:30 in the morning, I woke up in a flash and was as wide awake as I've ever been in my life.
Wow.
With the first line of this book in my head. And it wouldn't leave me alone. And so I began writing, and I wrote, and it took me 10 years, and I had to write it from scratch 4 times. And it was like I'm fording a river. And each version, each draft was like a rock placed as far as I could into the river. And then I could stand on that and reach with the next draft. And, people have said to me, oh, how wonderful that you persevered for 10 years writing this book. And it wasn't like that at all. It was a soul agony not to be writing it. It was pulling at me.
Yeah, draw.
And it was, in a funny way, it was based on workshops that I was teaching mainly for actors. And my workshops were based on principles that I'd gleaned from this classical form of theater in Japan called No theater. And the actors workshop birthed the book, which isn't at all about acting. But I mean, here's the thing, that the principles that bring a performance to life on stage are the same principles that support our life in the waking world. Any exercise that is helpful to an actor is just another way of learning to be present. That's what the actor's exploring. And so that issue of being present and what impedes that and how to surrender to it and what gets in the way of it. I mean, so a lot of everything I do is about the ways in which our culture desensitizes us. It tells us to live in the head. It tells us the head should be in charge. And, you don't even begin to realize how our language is shaped around that imperative of putting the head in charge until you realize that, when you do a head count, you're counting how many people are in the room. When you do a body count, you're counting how many dead people there are, right? When you have an organization, the leader of that organization, it's always the head of the organization. And we don't even question it because that's the way it is. Because of course the head should be in charge. And I think about the church and I think, well, maybe the leader of the church should be the heart of the church, because here's an institution based on love. Or the lungs of the church, because spirit and breath come from the same word. But no, it's got to be the head. The head's got to be in charge. And then you look at all our words for leaders. Captain comes from a Latin word for head. Chief, like chief executive officer, comes from a Latin word for head. You have the capital city of Australia, comes from a Latin word for head. So there's this. And even to be patriotic, the word patriotic means of the fathers. So patriarchy and leading with the head, to me, are intimately aligned. That I feel the head and its intelligence as the male pole of my consciousness, and I feel the pelvic floor, the pelvic bowl, as the female pole of my consciousness. And they are meant to be in continuous exchange. But instead, we've severed that relationship. So as a consequence, we carry a wound that we're not even aware of. We've habituated to it. And it's the wound that separates our thinking from our being. So that we come to believe, you go into the public education system and you are systematically taught every day that you're there that thinking happens in the head, the body is something to be controlled, you will be punished if your body's not controlled. Well, to stifle the body's energy is to stifle the body's intelligence. There's no other way around it. And to fill the head with the correct information, you will be rewarded and praised for that. And so what we learn, without anyone ever explicitly saying it to us, is that we can think more clearly if we dull ourselves to the noise below the neck and just concentrate with the head. So if you step back from that, what we're being told is that you can think better with a fragmented portion of your intelligence than you can with the whole of your being. So New Self, New World looks at that superstructure of our culture and all the ways in which we are alienated from the female. And again, it's like it's so drilled into us. It's so deeply saturated through our culture that we don't see it. So we don't see, for example, that our culture tells us that up is good and down is bad. But if I say you're looking up today, you know what I mean. Yeah. Or if I'm saying, oh, you're looking a little low today, you know what I mean. It's a cultural artifact. In another culture, to say to somebody you're looking up today, you could be saying, you're looking a little flighty and ungrounded. Are you okay? Or to say to somebody you're looking down today, you could be saying, oh, you're looking at peace with yourself and at rest on the earth. How wonderful. Mm-hmm. But no, we've internalized up is good and down is bad because that is the relationship we have with our bodies. We have left this female pole of the body and migrated up into the head. And that's happened over 8,000 years. So that the earth is demonized. Mother Earth is where we locate the arena of hell. And the sky, which cannot support life, the heavens are where we locate heaven. I mean, they are called the heavens, aren't they? So there's this whole, there's this unseen superstructure that we have taken into our beings before we were old enough even to pose a question, and so we don't see it. And until we change our relationship with our bodies, I think we will remain in a controlling, top-down, dominating relationship with the world around us, with our relationships with people, with our relationships with everything. We want to control everything. So New Self, New World gives that kind of overview, and it offers an invitation back to the body. Radical Wholeness, there's very little overlap between the book. My second book is Radical Wholeness. I have a copy of it here somewhere. There. Radical Wholeness. It looks at just one thing, really, which is that as a culture, we are blind to wholeness. Now, we give lip service to wholeness. We, practice holistic medicine and holistic everything. We shop at Whole Foods and we love wholeness, but we don't know what it is anymore. It's why we struggle. You have to go on a retreat for 5 days to feel yourself as a whole in the present as a whole. That's what it takes. We define wholeness as though it were an envelope. So for me to be whole, I don't know if you know this saying, to be whole in body, mind, and spirit. It's a beautiful saying, and it's very old. But when you dig into it, what it's telling you is that all you have to do is organize these three aspects of the self, body, mind, and spirit, and bring them into harmony within yourself, and you will be whole. There's no such thing. Wholeness doesn't have a boundary. If I am to drop into my wholeness, I am coming into relationship with the world around me. And it is the world that illuminates who I am in the moment. I discover myself through relationship, not through some form of self-organization. So radical wholeness looks at the ways in which we have been desensitized to wholeness. Now, just to be clear, to be desensitized to wholeness is to be desensitized to reality. Because all there is wholeness. Everything holds everything else. Everything depends on everything. Everything affects everything. It's the unavoidable nature of the reality in which we live. So if we have lost our ability to feel wholeness, we've lost our ability to come into harmony with reality. And then, of course, we impose ourselves on it. And as radical wholeness looks at other cultures, because we will remain bound by our cultural assumptions until we learn to open to this phenomenal diversity of understanding what it means to be human. When I traveled on my bicycle from England to Japan, I went through so many ways of understanding what it means to be human, and every single one of them was luminous, and every single one of them was limited. And we can help each other. So there's the Anglo-Ewe culture in Africa that has a completely different understanding of what our senses are. They experience the world differently. They don't even have a word for senses, but they do have a word, sesilolame. And sesilolame means, or translates as, feel at flesh inside.
Wow.
And that is how they attune to the world. So, it's one thing to listen with the ear, and they can do that, and they've got a word for that, but that's not real listening. Real listening is when you feel the sounds of the world in the body. Real seeing is when you see and feel the sights of the world in the body. And, then you contrast feel at flesh inside with our mode of being, which is pretty much summarized by think at head inside. And you realize by contrast what an impoverishment we live in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so dull in comparison.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and we feel that staleness. And so we need more. And there is always enough right here. The present is only insufficient when you are insufficiently present. And until you are fully in your body, you're not present.
Yeah. Pretty cool thinking about it. And those books, I think, for anyone who is interested in reading them, should purchase them. Because,
I would.
Sorry, go on.
If anyone is interested in reading, I've got the other book here, New Self, New World. I would recommend people start with Radical Wholeness. It's the second book, but it's a slightly easier read. They could segue into that and then step into New Self, New World if they were moved to do so.
And I think it definitely aligns with, I guess, my beliefs, but also I'm assuming those who are listening who are motivated to self-improve and learn more about oneself. It's a perfect way to start. And by reading that, it makes you take a step back and also ponder those questions for yourself.
It's questions that are very difficult to find. I think the most difficult thing to question is an assumption that you've completely habituated to. And approaching that assumption and seeing it is, in a way, the most valuable act of liberation there is.
Absolutely.
Because until you see it, there's no choice, and you don't realize even that you don't have choice. At least if you see the assumption, you're free to choose either to abide by it or to question it and move on. It's just a matter of choice.
Definitely. And I think just pondering all those questions is so enlightening as well and freeing. And although whilst you're getting to that point, it may be difficult to face those realities. Once you've arrived to there, you're enlightened, and I guess in some ways there's like a rebirth kind of thing.
Yeah, there is. There is. And until you can see those assumptions, you tend to be stuck on this question, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get it right? Why can't I sort it out? And as you see those assumptions, you realize that's the wrong question, because the accurate question is, what's wrong with my culture?
Yeah.
Right? And once you get it that, and you see the fantasy on which our culture is built, then you can begin to liberate yourself from it.
Definitely.
I think the deepest fantasy on which our culture is built is the fantasy of independence. We think independence is a real thing, and we think we should be independent ourselves, and we see the sort of aspects of the world as a an agglomeration of independent things. And you could search the cosmos and not turn up one single example of independence. It's a dream. It's insubstantial. It, it, it doesn't exist. And to come to terms with that, to come to terms with the fact that, yes, you are an individual, but you are an individual in this matrix that is so seamlessly interrelated that everything you do affects everything else. That's what our culture is missing.
Yeah, I think being people from people want to attain that independence because they think that's what society requires to make you strong and everything else. But what I'm trying to get at is that in reality, it's actually asking those questions, and like if you need some assistance with something actually makes you stronger because you're giving in to that vulnerability and that place where it kind of requires you to lean on other people too.
There's a Greek philosopher, Antisthenes, who had a great line, see if I can remember it. The most important act of learning is actually to unlearn what you know that is actually false. We know so many things and we take it for granted, and how to question that and liberate ourselves. And there's such freedom in it. To come back to the body, to come back to the present, to escape that treadmill of the head that goes round and round and round. We have compromised our humanity, and the only possible outcome of that is a compromise in our relationships with the world around us. And I don't think we can just reach out with our technology and fix the world around us. I think the primary reparation has to be the healing within ourselves.
We can only heal ourselves for there to be progress with other things. Yeah. One step at a time, I suppose.
Yeah. There's a great writer, Charles Davis, who said, control is not the solution. Control is the disease from which we must cure ourselves. It's pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty beautiful and so true.
Yeah.
So I think with those books, I go back to New Self, New World, and it makes me think about people with anxiety and OCD. So people who are in their heads all the time and they just want that control to kind of appease the symptoms that they've got. And even with radical wholeness, it's about the evolution of oneself, but also attaining good health, which kind of leads me to the title of Unearthing Wellbeing. And for yourself, how do you manage things like self-care, burnout, self-doubt?
It's a good question. One of the characteristics that is common to anxiety and depression and OCD and so many of the states that afflict us, what they all have in common is the sense that you are alone. And it's a sense that our culture breeds into us. And there's no such thing as aloneness in this world. Your very heartbeat is felt by the room around you. The air you breathe, you're taking into your body the exhalations of forests that are nourishing your cells, and you breathe out and exchange carbon dioxide that someday may become wood in trees. There is this teeming kinship in the world. That's the reality into which we're born. And the fantasy of independence, the fantasy of aloneness, it's not an easy thing to rescue yourself from. So, my self-care, I'm cared for by the world. I turn to, I'll go for a walk on the beach, and I am held and in communion. You step into nature, and you're stepping into this chorus of communion. I think the obsession, we're an obsessed culture, and I think the germ of that obsession is with organizing. And that's a very head down approach, but we organize everything. I mean, we organize our emotions. We organize our responses to people. So you see someone and you've already organized your response before you've even had a chance to feel their being in this moment. We organize our thoughts. We organize our days. We organize everything. And we think that if we can just get that organization right, that's the way to win. That's the way to be happy. And the problem is that the more successful you are at self-organizing, the less available you become to the present. I think one of the most salient features of that state of being present is the quality of feeling yourself being organized by the present. You are being informed by it. You are being healed by it, carried by it. And so the impulse for, self-care or self-management or whatever it might be is an impulse that is founded to some extent on that fantasy of independence. And so to come back to, the body as a resonator, the world will breathe its wisdom through your being. And as you attune to that, there is born in you a clarity about how to move forward. The world is whispering to you at every moment, calling for you to put your gifts into service. And everyone is born with this unique cluster of gifts. No one else has ever had the gifts that you have in that cluster. And the world is saying, put them into service. Come, risk, play. Let them live. And once you feel that called forth from you, then you are on purpose. And when you're on your purpose, what could be better?
I love that answer. Yeah. And I think everyone defines that differently. And your definition of that is pretty spectacular.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are living in that state of self-organization. I know I'm guilty of that. But I think if I learned anything from last year, it's that you need to put that aside, because you don't know what's going to be happening in the next hour, let alone the next week or month. So if you're being present and just taking it as it comes and riding the waves, you're actually enjoying life a lot more, and you're putting your self-care first, per se.
Yeah, and you know, there's a place for organization. We wouldn't have met up on Zoom without organizing the time. There's a place for it, but order is the opposite of harmony. Order is a predetermined system that's imposed on life, and it regiments it. Harmony is what happens when every part of an organic whole comes into relationship with every other part. And that, the cover of Radical Wholeness, it's actually
is that a flock of birds?
It's a murmuration of starlings. I don't know if you've ever seen a murmuration of starlings.
No.
Check it on YouTube. You have to, because at dusk, these birds gather. And when I say these birds gather, it's like 250,000 birds become this organism in the sky that lifts and expands and drifts, and there is no one in charge of this murmuration. Every bird is perfectly responsive to every other, and they are attuning to the world around them. And that's my image for harmony. So when my body comes into coherence, when I'm in that state of embodiment where I feel the coherence of my intelligence, it feels like the murmuration of my being responding to the world.
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
Really do on YouTube, murmuration of starlings. Yeah. And you could spend 20 minutes. There's so many of them, and they're so beautiful. And there you are, right? That's your being as well. And it's just the perfect model for, you know, the surrender that allows the grace of the world to move through us.
Absolutely. I am definitely going to be looking that up. Thank you so much. Yeah. And to wrap up our chat, we'll talk, because I just sat back and enjoyed everything that you had to say. So thank you. Tell us what your top 3 tips are for unearthing our own well-being.
You know, inner work is crucial, but we misunderstand it. I think inner work is about finding where those tensions have lodged, where those shadows are harbored. It's like the bell, and you're finding the cotton balls that are stuck inside the body and integrating them. It's not a matter of getting rid of them. It's a matter of feeling them and honoring them and giving them the love that enables them to integrate. To understand inner work in that sense will unlock you from the prison of self-consciousness into the harmony of the world. And then number 3, if that's 2, number 3 would be to practice gentleness, to find how to be gentle with yourself, how to be gentle with the world around you, with your neighbors, with people you meet. Gentleness to me is the quality of relationship. And we have come out of relationship. We have disconnected. You know, when I have 2 daughters, and when they were babies, you know, you'd move their arm into the sleeve, and so gently. In that gentleness, you feel the whole of their being, and you are dancing with it. And to come back to gentleness, which our culture doesn't much honor, is to come back into felt relationship and to distance ourselves or unhook ourselves from needing known relationship. I mean, we need to know everything in our world, and I know everything in the room around me, and the problem is, if I know everything around me, I don't need to feel any of it, and then the body becomes irrelevant. Gentleness opens the door to feeling.
Thank you so much for that. I felt like I learned a lot from this, so I appreciate it a lot. Thank you. And I think that a lot of people will take something from this chat.
I know I will.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure being with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I honestly really enjoyed this discussion with Phillip. I felt my brain ticking away, thinking, considering, and expanding there and then. I am very lucky to have had Phillip say yes to being a guest. I hope you also took something away from it. You can find out more about Phillip on his website, embodiedpresent.com. To ensure Ask Elizabeth and Unearthing Wellbeing continues to grow, please subscribe and rate the podcast. Feel free to also share and tag us on your socials. You can now purchase a huge range of holistic health products on my website, www.askelizabeth.com.au/shop. To start your journey of unearthing well-being, where your greatest wealth is health. I hope you have a lovely day, be safe and be kind. Take care.